Hi, and welcome back to Rebel Roots Nutrition. I'm Carla, your host. Today's topic is how to feed your phase. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, there's certain changes, hormonal fluctuations and other changes that are taking place during the menstrual cycle. And we're going to take a look today at what are the nutrients that are going to support those changes during those specific times in the cycle. This applies to any cycling female, but to me, I kind of like to think about it through the lens of preconception and normalizing and regulating your cycle and really supporting and nourishing that cycle in order to prepare your body for conception. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, so feed your phase, nutrition for the menstrual cycle. So this is the topic for today. We generally think of the cycle in 4 phases. Two, depending on how you look at it, you have the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So the follicular phase being the first half, but then we have a phase within that, which is the first 1 to 5 days is the menstruation. That phase, of course, when we're shedding the uterine lining and we're actively bleeding. And then within the luteal phase, we have ovulation, and that marks the beginning of the luteal phase. So the cycle is generally on average 27 to 29 days, but a normal cycle really varies, and it can look like anywhere from 21 to 35 days. Ideally, 24 to 35 days is healthy, so that we have a healthy luteal phase. We want the length of the luteal phase to be at least 12 days, according to the research. So the primary hormones that are involved here are estrogen, progesterone, FSH, which is follicular stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. So here's a nice little visual that kind of just breaks this down. We're looking at that menstrual cycle, again, lasting about 3 to 7 days. And the follicular phase tends to be days 1 through 14. Again, that is really dependent on the length of your cycle. And that's one of the reasons that tracking your cycle is so important. And then we have ovulation around day 14. I know for me, it's day 13, so it really just depends. But usually it's pretty consistent once you are able to really notice the patterns. And then the luteal phase is that second half, day roughly 14 through 28 if it was a 28-day cycle. Okay, here's another slide I really love as well. I did not create this slide. I can't remember where I found this one, but this is just a great visual here of these 4 hormones that are really at play. So you can kind of see the luteinizing hormone has this one real steep peak right before ovulation. And then you can see FSH has a couple peaks, but particularly around ovulation as well. And then estrogen has 2 peaks happening here. And progesterone really only peaks after ovulation has occurred, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So just to briefly touch on this, these are just some of the reasons that we would chart. Obviously to avoid unwanted pregnancy, as well as to get pregnant and kind of really being able to identify your fertile days, but also it's really helpful in just kind of getting to know certain patterns in your own body. So tracking mood fluctuations, different times that exercise might be, different types of exercise actually that might be more appropriate at different times based on energy levels, that kind of thing. So really just highly recommend tracking. So we're going to begin with menstruation. So again, menstruation is the first part of the follicular phase. And this is a restorative phase. So we are shedding the uterine lining, which takes a lot of energy because of the blood loss and the iron loss that's happening. So we don't want to overdo it. We want to really think about foods that are restorative and that are going to provide and promote sleep and energy, and also that are going to reduce inflammation, because the shedding of the uterine lining releases prostaglandins, which are these inflammatory chemicals. So some of the foods that are very supportive during this time include magnesium. This aids sleep as well as helping with cramps. Iron, obviously, we want to replenish the iron that is being lost. So we want to think about with magnesium, dark chocolate, which oftentimes chocolate is craved during this time, which makes a lot of sense. Cherries, seeds, these provide are great sources of magnesium. And as far as iron goes, we've got heme iron that comes from red meat and other animal sources. And then we have non-heme iron that we can get from leafy greens, pumpkin seeds, quinoa, red kidney beans, and sources like that. Vitamin C makes iron more absorbable. So vitamin C rich foods as well, but they're going to act as antioxidants. So antioxidants include foods like garlic, ginger, turmeric, rosemary, and green tea. These are all helping to deal with that inflammation that's arising. We also want to think about hydration, so just drinking more fluids more generally because of the loss of blood, which is also a loss of fluid within the body. So teas like red raspberry leaf, nettle, lemongrass, these can provide additional hydration, but they also, some of them tone the uterus and support hormones. Coconut water, bone broth, these are also great hydration sources. And then finally, we want to think about eating warm cooked foods, because cold foods require a lot more energy in order to digest them and absorb them. So this is where it becomes important to provide the body with these gently cooked and warm foods. The follicular phase. So the follicular phase, again, the menstrual phase sort of kicks this off, but, or menstruation, I should say, kicks this off. But this is the time when, after the uterine lining has shed, we're now focusing on the growth of follicles in prep for the release of an egg. So multiple follicles will grow, and then one will sort of take over and mature and become the dominant follicle. And this process releases more estrogen. So we're building the uterine lining again, and we're doing that in kind of preparation for the potential to fertilize an egg. This is where estrogen will peak and luteinizing hormone is triggered to signal ovulation. So the goal here, we want to increase, we want to support the increased energy availability. So we kind of start to regain energy. And then we also want to think about supporting the microbiome, especially with proper elimination of excess estrogens that build up during this time. And we want to assist those the blood building efforts. So foods that do this, carbohydrates. This is actually one of the best times to consume carbs because of increased insulin sensitivity at this time. Estrogen metabolizing foods. Well, and I'll go back, but so carbohydrates, we really want to focus on, complex carbohydrates, vegetables, colorful veggies, leafy greens, that kind of thing, and then also whole grains. So the estrogen metabolizing foods, these include, there's a lot of different ones that are included in here, but we want to think about probiotics and probiotic-rich foods, fermented foods like kefir, kombucha, kimchi, those kinds of foods are really helpful here. And then omega-3 rich foods. So again, there is a little buildup of inflammation here, and foods that support this, obviously antioxidant rich foods, which we really should be eating throughout, but foods rich in omega-3, since these tend to be the anti-inflammatory omega oils and fatty acids versus the omega-6, which we tend to get plenty of. So the ovulatory phase. During this phase, we kind of preceding it, there's increased cervical mucus. There is a spike in the basal body temperature after ovulation, but we have this increased cervical mucus, luteinizing hormone peaks, and the follicle ruptures, the egg is released. Mittelschmerz is the name of sometimes the pain that can be associated with ovulation. But we're releasing this egg. Its lifespan is about 12 to 24 hours. But what's really important here is that this is where progesterone essentially production begins. And so that follicle kind of shrivels up and it becomes what's called the corpus luteum. And once it becomes the corpus luteum, that's when that progesterone is, that's where and how it's being produced. So sometimes things can get in the way of this, especially in the case of women who maybe have PCOS. And this is where multiple follicles grow, but none of them really mature or rupture. And so without that happening, there is no progesterone being produced. And so this can really just disrupt the cycle generally. But so the goal here is to support liver for estrogen detoxification and to facilitate elimination and bloating. I don't know about anybody else, but for me, this is the phase where I tend to feel the most bloated. So supporting nutrients include probiotic and prebiotic rich foods. The prebiotics, sort of the foods that are going to fuel those probiotics. So fermented foods, again, like we talked about, kimchi, kombucha, yogurt, foods like that. And then prebiotic rich foods being a lot of your vegetables and oligosaccharides, these foods that are going to enrich that bacteria. Also, soluble and insoluble fiber. Soluble really does help to sequester and remove estrogen and help detoxify estrogen, and insoluble fiber does so by just keeping the bowels healthy and bowel movements moving along smoothly so that estrogens don't, get backed up and reabsorbed. Cruciferous and sulfur-containing veggies, these are also really important. So cruciferous veggies are high in indole 3 carbonyls and diindole methane. These are involved in the metabolism of estrogen as well for elimination. And these include things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. So these are your cruciferous veggies. And then onions and garlic provide sulfur, which is involved in the phase 2 of liver detoxification, which I think I've definitely talked about in another episode, prior one, on that phase 2 called conjugation. So they provide sulfur. Onions and garlic are a really great example of foods that do that. And specific B vitamins like B12 and folate. These are, folate will come mostly from your leafy greens, and B12 comes mostly from animal sources, or it will be fortified in certain foods like nutritional yeast. And these both are involved in the methylation pathway, which is another part of phase 2 liver detoxification. And then dandelion tea, because this is supportive of the liver as well. And also, actually, dandelion tea can help with bloating. And then finally, we get into the luteal phase. So the luteal phase, as I said, ovulation kicks this off, but we are, again, here, this is where the corpus luteum is producing progesterone, and the endometrium is thickening again for potential fertilization. So estrogen will surge kind of around days 20 to 22. And this estrogen surge is often associated with the symptoms that we experience around PMS. But yeah, so what's happening is if fertilization doesn't happen, then progesterone will decline, and menstruation will take place, and the whole cycle kind of starts all over again. But what we want to be thinking about here is supporting progesterone production, as well as supporting mood and sleep, and then optimizing digestion and combating inflammation. So some of the goals and some of the nutrients overlap a bit, but in this phase, we're really looking at adding in and boosting those progesterone promoting foods. So foods rich in B6, like avocado and banana, salmon, foods like magnesium, dark chocolate again, cherries and seeds are great sources of these. And antioxidants too. Vitamin C is important to combat some of that inflammation, but also vitamin C is thought to boost progesterone as well. So bell peppers are a very high source of vitamin C, and then citrus fruits, of course. Again, so here we want to think about adding also, or putting some attention around our fat-soluble vitamins as well. So vitamins A, D, E, and K. Since these play a role in our nervous system function and health, and B12 and probiotics also play a role in the health of our nervous system, therefore kind of supporting mood. Protein-rich foods also, they are important for the production of our neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. So we want to make sure that we're getting enough protein as well. So that is kind of my brief overview at this point of the foods that you would be looking to incorporate during different times of the cycle. I think it's really kind of interesting to note that there's even different times for different types of exercise during the cycle. High intensity cardio workouts are great in the follicular phase, sort of near the end when estrogen is high. Whereas, and actually, estrogen, when it's higher, it also there's greater risk for injury too. So this is also, a time to be careful of overstretching, that kind of thing. But then days 1 through 6, when we're actively bleeding, we want to choose exercise that's like a little bit slower, kind of lower body focused, more grounding and restorative. So walking or yoga. But in any case, hopefully this was helpful, and it just kind of brought some attention to the different phases and how we can support them with the right nutrients at the right time. I hope that you will reach out if you have any questions. This is my contact here, and it's been a pleasure. Tune in next time. Thanks.